Then we start getting Tesco's phoning us up saying, guys, I know you just made a delivery like 2 days ago. We're completely out of stock. We don't know what's happening. There's scores of people coming through our stores. They're waiting outside for 7 a.m. and they're all buying packs and packs of Little Moons. We want to order, I don't know, pallets.
Welcome back to 40 Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, we're joined by Vivien Wong, co-founder of Little Moons, the popular mochi ice cream brand. Vivien started her career in banking before spotting an opportunity in 2010 to bring mochi ice cream to Europe with her brother, Howard. It took 2 years to perfect the process and brand before initially selling Little Moons products into restaurants. And fast forward today, Little Moons went viral on social media, launched in big retail brands in the UK and internationally, and has a team of over 350 people. In today's episode, we'll dive into the early days of Little Moons and the fantastic growth journey that Vivien and the team have been on. Plus, we'll discuss what it's really like to start and grow a family business with your sibling. So a big warm welcome, Vivien. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's great to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. And I was saying off air, I come from a family that loves Little Moons. We have some in the freezer. We had some over the weekend. So I am personally very excited to hear all about the business and your career. But before we dive into all that, we're going to warm you up with some quickfire questions, as we always like to. So please, can you finish the following sentences after me? Number 1, the moment that defined my career was when?
Was when we went viral on TikTok in 2021.
Amazing. We won't give us any more spoilers now. We'll come back to that in a minute. My biggest failure to date is?
Oh, I think it's to do with building our new factory, which we never ended up opening.
Interesting. One to come back to again. Thank you. A skill I wish I had mastered earlier is?
Self-confidence.
Interesting.
Easy answer.
It's funny how that one does come up a lot. And a life lesson I keep coming back to is?
It's something I say to myself quite often, and that's I'm not responsible for this. Because I think as a founder, you feel overly responsible for many, many things, and you need to pick out what you are responsible for and what you're not. And it's also in life as well.
That is so true. That's a really, really good one. Well, thank you for sharing that, Vivien. The self-confidence one's interesting. I just want to quickly pick up on that, because I guess often founders have to be so confident and have such conviction in their ideas to get out and sell, whether it's to investors or consumers, and attract talent. Was that self-confidence, has that always been a thing throughout your life? Was that when you were younger? Because clearly you're incredibly talented and have achieved so much, but it's funny sometimes how that is something you sometimes have to continue working on.
I think all the entrepreneurs that I've met have been driven by insecurity of some sort, actually, or some sort of difficulty in their upbringing has driven them to become entrepreneurs. So I always had confidence in the product. I had confidence in our ability to make it a delicious product. I guess the confidence part is then, coming across that way to distributors, to chefs, to all the naysayers, to all the knockbacks. That's the confidence you've got to have. And then as you move towards your career, it's then having the confidence to manage a growing team, a different caliber of team as your business grows. And it's just constant work. So I've worked a lot with an executive coach to help me on that journey.
That's really interesting. And I'm seeing more and more executive coaches being talked about amongst the founder networks that I'm in and peers, and it's so valuable. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's probably really important for people to hear. I guess it's a nice segue actually to turning back the clocks and learning a bit about your upbringing, because that often is very important in terms of the entrepreneurial path you took. And I believe your parents had their own bakery when you were growing up. So tell us a bit about your upbringing and where that sort of entrepreneurial spirit came from.
So my brother and I guess people say you have different parents. And so my brother, as a boy, was brought up very much both of us had to be very good academically. But what was different is that my mum said to me privately, as a woman, you should pick a business whereby you can have children as well. So even though I did end up working in the city, which is not very child or family friendly, she said she always encouraged me to start my own business. That was what drove her to start her own business, her bakery, which my father then later joined, because she struggled to take care of me as a child. Like back in the 70s, we didn't have the employment laws and protections that we have now. So when I was sick, she had to pretend to be sick too. She couldn't work from home. That obviously didn't exist, or that sort of sympathy for parents wasn't there. And so I watched her build up her bakery later on with my dad as well. And I think seeing the tenacity and the work ethic that they both had, and when you grow up sitting around the dinner table with your parents talking about work, you can't help but take it in. And then as we got older, we're children of immigrants. We're pulled in to help in the factory, in the bakery, in school holidays and at weekends. And when I got my first car, I had to do deliveries every weekend. So you can't help but live and breathe.
Proper family business.
Yeah, the entrepreneurial spirit, you can't help but live and breathe it.
Yeah, I love that. I guess probably it was pretty inevitable. You ended up going down that path, but you didn't do it instantly. You studied economics. You started your career in banking, as you mentioned, qualifying as an accountant. So a very traditional, great sort of grounding in your career. What sort of skills do you feel you picked up in those early years that have really helped you since in your entrepreneurial life?
I'm really glad that I went to work for someone else and I didn't say join a family business immediately, so that you're only learning from how your parents did things. Like doing a professional qualification, I had to start an audit, as all people have to. So I visited a lot of businesses. I met a lot of entrepreneurs. I could see how their businesses were run. Some were run really well, some were less well run. And so that's, apart from just looking at the numbers, you can just have a feel for the office as well. So that was good grounding. And then I guess going to Barclays Capital after that, or Barclays, it's a whole different level of business. It was much bigger than the accounting firm that I worked for. And then you can see again the size, all the professional bits that they have in place. So an IT department, for example, you just phone up and someone fixes it for you over the computer, or HR systems, like performance appraisals and all of this. Like you can see how bonuses are discussed, pay rises are structured, all of this stuff. So these are the things that you pick up when you work for a professional organization, which my parents' bakery did not have. A small family bakery, we certainly didn't have those practices in place. So when I came back to work, firstly, I did start helping at my parents' bakery before we started Little Moons. I had to help my mum put in place, I think, factory systems and things like health and safety we didn't necessarily have. And then we started needing good manufacturing practices for the bakery. Is like, I guess there were more environmental health visits and things like that. And as we started Little Moons as well, those were the things that I had to understand of running a factory, which I hadn't learned anywhere else. But I understood, I had the grounding to understand how a professional business is structured. So those are all the things that I learned from my career, and I brought them over, which I thought were really helpful. And also, I don't know if your listeners have heard of Wing Yip, and I always looked up to Wing Yip because their father started it and the sons took over, but the sons had all worked in accounting firms. I think KPMG was one of them. And you could tell how well Wing Yip was run. It was like a really slick professional organization compared to some of the mum and dad sort of Chinese supermarkets that I used to also deliver to. So that was a business that I sort of looked up to and thought, these kids have really learned how to run a business in a very professional Western way. And I wanted to emulate that.
Love that. Thank you. Well, I have no doubt a lot of our listeners will have heard of Little Moons, will hopefully have tasted them because they are absolutely delicious. But for those that haven't, do you mind taking us back to the genesis of the business, what it's all about, really? And then we'd love to dive into the nitty gritty of the early days of starting and scaling it.
So when my brother and I were working in the city, we noticed that Japanese food was just becoming more and more popular. There was like an itsu or yo sushi on every corner, but I thought the dessert offering was quite disappointing. So my parents made traditional mochi in their factory. So it was something that we'd grown up eating. But traditional the mochi is a lot thicker and a little bit chewier, and it's filled with red beans. So texture and filling, both a little bit odd. Most sort of like European palates didn't really, really like it. So when we were in Japan, we tried mochi with ice cream. We tried the same in America, but the ice cream wasn't great quality. And for kids that had grown up in Europe, we'd eaten Italian gelato. We just knew how great, perfect, really, really good Italian gelato can taste. And we thought,
It makes such a difference.
doesn't it? And so we thought, why don't we make ice cream gelato of that quality, but then wrap it in mochi that is sort of melt in your mouth, not too chewy, get the texture right. And so that's really where we got the idea for Little Moons. We thought we could supply it to restaurants to begin with. We knew there wouldn't be a market for mochi ice cream in the supermarkets immediately because people wouldn't take it off the shelf. And that's really how we started the business, very small. And we started really slowly. I think not many people realize that Little Moons was started in 2010. So we've been running for 15 years now. So 10 years before we went viral on TikTok, which gave us some good grounding to learn our craft, to set up good foundations for the business, which then allowed us to scale as quickly as we did.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it does probably explain a lot that you honed your craft and the quality of the product and the process and systems that actually enabled you to maybe grow at a ridiculous rate. You had a lot of those foundations in place, which I think sometimes companies don't have when things sort of explode out of nowhere.
And may I add something as well, James? So, another genesis of Little Moons is that growing up in a family bakery, my parents really cared about quality because they were selling to their friends, like other Asian people. And so quality was very important to them. And so when we started Little Moons, quality was of the utmost importance to us as well. So we went and used really good quality purees. We put real pistachio in our, well, back then we didn't use pistachio, but we used real pistachio. It's not mixed with any sort of like fillers of almond flavor. We were very particular about what we put into our product. And that was something that I learned from the family bakery
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
as well. When you talked about our craft,
Mm.
yeah, it was all part of that.
It's great. I love the thread between the sort of the learnings from the family business and how that's kind of come through to the next generation of family business, albeit in a different setup. So tell us a bit about those early days for you and your brother. You know, some of the biggest lessons you learned. I think I heard on another podcast that your dad was involved in the early iteration of the product as well. So tell us a bit about those scrappy days, the good bits, and maybe some of the harder parts that you had to kind of get through.
I went just learning product development. Like, I'm not from a food tech background. I went to Reading University and I really should have done food technology, but I did not. That would have come in super handy. And so my dad helped us with the recipe because he was such a crazy professor like that. He loved tinkering with things and always making things better in his bakery. So obviously he helped us with making our dough because it's quite hard to wrap hot dough around ice cream and then to freeze it down together without the dough changing texture or any of the quality issues. It was that was the most difficult part for both of us to crack, not having food technology backgrounds. It took us 2 years to perfect that. And those were like the most wonderful years working with my dad because he died in 2018.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was a big reason why we started the business. He was diagnosed with cancer in 2007, and I was still working in banking at that time. But that's where I realized how short life was. And if you want to do something, you have to do it now. And so I left banking in 2008, a year later, once we decided that this is what I want to do. What if I was to die tomorrow, what would I regret? Number one was not starting my own business, and second was not having a dog. I'm absolutely dog crazy. And so I thought, if I'm going to start making a list of things, like, let's start ticking these things off. And so, yeah, started this. So with dad, I feel like this is his legacy. Like, we worked so hard to get our recipe right. It's exactly the same recipe that we still use to this day. And I feel so lucky to have spent so much time with him every day, getting to see him and my mum too. And when my brother also joined the business, we'd sit down and have family lunches together. Like, mum would cook, we'd all sit around and have lunch. And then we'd get on with the day. And so those times are really special to me. And then I guess with Howard and I, as Little Moons grew, we didn't have responsibilities. We kind of did everything. And things started falling between the cracks. And I'd be like, Howard, like, this didn't happen. He's like, well, was I meant to do it? Why didn't you do it? And we'd have sibling bickering. And then we realized that we needed to split responsibilities. We'd got a Ned, a non-executive director, on board by then, and he's quite private, so I won't share his name, but God, he was patient with us, and he said, guys, you guys need to learn how to work together. I think you guys should do a personality test, and you also need to define your responsibilities clearly, so everyone's responsibility is noted and respected. So that was really helpful. Howard did sales and marketing, I did operations, finance, HR, all that sort of operational side things. And then we did a personality test, which is the insight test, so you can see what colors you are. So Howard and I, absolute polar opposites on this scale. And when we found that out, it was fascinating. And it also meant that we worked so much better together as founders. I would recommend that anyone who is a founder, or anyone in your team as well, should do something like this and help you guide how you manage each other. We actually do that now for every single employee at Little Moons.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I guess our day job is running executive search processes. And to the point of our responsibilities and having a clearly defined set of accountabilities is one of the most important things at the very beginning of any search. Because sometimes when we're doing a COO search, for a high growth company, there can be some gray areas of function. Oh, maybe this function report here or there, or, I currently do this as a founder CEO and I want to keep hold of this and that. Getting clarity so you can set up a hire for success or somebody for a success is so important and sometimes gets sort of overlooked. So I'm really pleased that you shared that. And I think the personality test is also really interesting. We've done that before at JBM, and it's just great to sort of just be, sometimes it just reaffirms what you think or know, but it just gives that clarity. And then you can learn to work with people better, can't you, if you know sort of what they're all about and maybe the differing styles that you have. That's really, really interesting. I know you initially started selling into restaurants. So can you tell us a bit more about why you went down that route rather than going straight after retail?
Well, we were self-funded. So I think, firstly, branding costs a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
Secondly, if we had launched Little Moons in 2010 and even got a listing in any supermarket, I'm pretty sure we would have lost that listing pretty quickly because no one would have taken us off the shelf. We were cognizant of this, so we thought we need to build the market for Little Moons. And we thought restaurants was a good place to start because chefs are on the forefront of bringing in new things to consumers, and consumers go to restaurants to try new things. They're much more likely to order a plate of mochi from a restaurant than they are taking it off the shelf in Tesco's. So we targeted Japanese restaurants because that's where we first got the idea from. And one of the first customers we had was Yo Sushi, who's absolutely huge, like was our dream client to begin with. We never dreamed we'd get into, I can't remember how many they had, like 110 at the time. And then a few other smaller sushi restaurants around London, like quite high-end ones, like Nobu and Novikov and places like that. And then we decided to do the same thing in Europe as well, because we thought there's the same playbook in Germany, France, Italy, all over. And so we supplied restaurants exclusively for the first 5 years. And then the reason why we decided to choose that moment to move into retail was because food bloggers started saying, oh, I went to this Japanese restaurant and the chef told me that they buy Little Moons. And we thought, God, how, like, people are starting to talk about our name. We never publicized ourselves at all. We never had an Instagram account. And then we had this wild story. This guy emailed us and he said, I would like to buy chocolate mochi from you directly if possible. Can we do that? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But why? How do you know we make chocolate mochi for Yo Sushi? And he said, well, I sat on the counter and I could see they didn't make the mochis fresh like their sushi because they were taking them out of a container. So I climbed through their bins to find the container, and that's where I got your email address from.
No way.
You cannot make this stuff up. So we thought, okay, interesting. So there are consumers that are now seeking us out. Maybe it's the right time for us to think about going into retail. So it saved us some money, and we went to a branding agency who then branded our first iteration of Little Moons packaging, which is very different to what it looks like now. And then we thought the best place for us to launch is Whole Foods, because we both loved Whole Foods. It's where you go to try new things, like cutting edge, brand new, like up and coming brands, or launch at Whole Foods. But a lot of our friends said, who are in the industry said, Whole Foods will never get back to you. Like, it can take a year for you to even get an acknowledgement from the Whole Foods buying team. So we were like, okay, we'll email them. We were willing to wait, expecting to wait even. And we got an email back within 20 minutes. And the buyer said, you had me at mochi. And so we launched with them really quickly. And I know, and we were their best-selling ice cream for, I want to say, 2 to 3 years. And it's such a great launch pad for us. And, we were willing to wait outside to meet the buyer, like in the waiting room, like lots of founders have said, oh, I couldn't get an answer back. So I was just waiting outside the door for him to leave the office for lunch. We were absolutely like ready to do that, but we were lucky with that.
Wow. And I'm assuming that probably created some serious momentum with other retailers, just the traction you had at somewhere like Whole Foods. Does that, when it comes to like the broader strategy of cracking retail, was that helpful leverage, or did you approach it in a different way?
It was helpful, but it was helpful for us to get into Ocado. They were very interested in us, and I think we were good product fit for Ocado, except by the time we'd finished the negotiations, and this happened 3 times, the buyer was leaving to go to a new position. So we'd almost get to the end and then they'd move on, and this happened twice. And then the third time, the buyer emailed us and said, oh, I'm moving to a new position on the day we were supposed to launch. And we're like, are we launching? Are we not? Like, we were just on the website, just checking, like, and then we'd launched. So we were like, oh, okay, phew, it's finally on there. And then from there, we had to convince the Waitrose buyer to stock us. And that's a whole nother story as well. That was difficult. And then Tesco's, it wasn't a shoot in at all. We still had to convince them of the category.
Yeah, got it. Well, it sounds like you just persevered and you got there, and then obviously just the momentum off the back of that has been incredible, and you've expanded internationally as well. So we'd love to hear a bit about the internationalization of the business, and particularly any advice you'd have for other founders listening to this, especially if they're sort of D2C founders, of just any tips and tricks from your experience of going international.
I think we did internationalize pretty early on in our journey, just because we had the format that was able to do so via restaurants. I think it's a little bit more difficult now that Brexit has happened, so it's harder to ship if you don't have large volumes. But I would always get in touch with the Department of, they used to be Trade and Industry. I think they're called something else now, but they're the government body that helps you export. And we'll call them the Department of Trade and Industry. And they helped us with doing exhibitions in France, Germany, internationally. We also did the Middle East, and they always have a stand that they build for you, and you just have to turn up, bring your products, and you have this tiny 1 by 1 meter stand where you just sort of have to try and meet people and collect credit card, like collect business cards and talk about your product. But at least you're not trying to find a local stand builder and all of the logistical problems. So they really support you with that. It's highly subsidized. And that's my number one advice if you want to export, is to get in touch with them first. And then after that, then that's where you can meet distributors to help you distribute and meet retailers and things.
This episode is sponsored by Capsule, the certified B Corp redefining insurance for high growth scaling businesses. As a neo broker powered by cutting edge API technology, Capsule streamline the insurance process, removing manual hassle and delivering tailored solutions that evolve with your business. They support ambitious companies across fast paced, innovative sectors such as fintech, health tech, SaaS, and sustainability, including clients like Bloom and Wild, Moneybox, Castor, and What Three Words. If you're a venture-backed startup looking to outsource the buying and management of your insurance, find out more on www.capsulecover.com. Now, back to today's 40-Minute Mentor. I know that scaling a business, especially when it's a family business, bootstrapped, is blood, sweat, and tears, and there are some always challenges and sort of painful moments along the way. But then there are sometimes these moments that just catapult a company into the public sphere. And you had one of those in terms of going viral on TikTok at a really critical point in the journey. And it has totally transformed, I think, the business. So tell us a bit about sort of that time, like what made you go onto TikTok and how did that sort of all evolve and change your trajectory?
We decided to bring on, I don't think she was an intern, but she was pretty junior when she started. Charlie started, and she like really eager, cool, young Gen Z who said, "Oh, there's a couple of social platforms that I'd like to jump on. TikTok's one of them. There was another one, I can't remember the name, but we joined a few of them. We were early adopters of them. And we thought, why not just give it a go? What have we got to lose?" And I think that's something where we're quite open-minded with things. We're not too controlling. And so if you're going to bring people in with fresh ideas, kind of trust them to run with it. And I think that was the only reason why we ended up being on TikTok early doors. And so it was just more of like, it was fun for us to watch the videos. It was fun for the team to make. It was all about dancing back then. It wasn't really about business, but that's what we did. Just had fun with it. And then it was the middle of COVID, January 2021. We were having team meetings, obviously all online. And Charlie said, "Oh, it was really interesting. We had 1,000 views on one of our videos. It was like on our, and we were like, oh, that's cool. Everyone's at home, nothing else to do, probably scrolling through TikTok." And then the next day she said, "Guys, this is really increasing." And over the next couple of days, it had gone up like 2,000, 10,000, 100,000. She was like, "This is crazy. I think this is called going viral." And we were like, "Oh my God, this is amazing," whatever. But we didn't realize at that point just sort of how nuts it was going to get. It was still lots of other things we were worried about during COVID, like cash flow, the factory, the factory had closed, all of this stuff. So when this came about, we were still, this is great, but the country's still shut down. How are we going to run the business? And so it was a bit of fun. But then, yes, absolutely. Then we could tell. Then we start getting Tesco's phoning us up saying, "Guys, I know you just made a delivery like 2 days ago, we're completely out of stock. We don't know what's happening. There's scores of people coming through our stores. They're waiting outside for 7 a.m. and they're all buying packs and packs of Little Moons. We want to order, I don't know, pallets. I can't remember what it was, like 25. Like if they usually order 25 pallets, they were ordering 50 or 100. And we were in a factory that was like had halved in size because people couldn't stand close together. They were all socially segregated. We couldn't get any new machinery because the manufacturers weren't working. We couldn't get more ingredients really from Asia because all the containers were in Europe. If you remember, there was a bit of a supply chain issue. And then if we could make it enough, we couldn't get the cardboard boxes to pack it in to then deliver it to the stores because apparently Amazon and all the PPE had a massive international pull on cardboard. So there was a lack of that as well. So behind the scenes, it was quite a painful process for us to meet the orders. But from a business point of view, it was transformational. It was things that you can only dream of. And it wasn't a video that we put out. It was a user generated video.
I mean, the ultimate validation, isn't it? That is incredible. And can I just quickly ask on how did you, with all of those factors kind of going against you at a time when you really needed things to come together because you had so much demand, how did you get through that period? And can you just put it in context in terms of like revenue or figures in terms of how that video took your business over that period of time? Like what was the transformation?
I think if you just put it in accounting years, I think our turnover went from 10 million to 27 million in a year.
Wow, that's incredible.
But it was actually because it was January, it was only the last 6 months. So actually all that growth was in the last 6 months of the business year. And how did I get through it? I can only thank my team. It wasn't anything else. It was the team pulling together. You mentioned something. I did say we've been going for 10 years. And so we had some systems in place and we had been able to hone our craft, as in our teams were very well trained in how to make mochi. However, we did not have the systems in place to scale a business from 10 to 27. And we probably had the systems in place of a £5 million business, maybe a £7 million business running a 27 million business and still growing. So it was very hard to put that in place. And I was reading James Clear, Atomic Habits at the time. And there is a phrase in there where he says, you don't grow to the level of your ambitions, you fall to the level of your systems. And I was like living that on a day-to-day basis. The reason why our growing pains were so painful was because we just didn't have the systems to support it. And when I talk about business systems, I mean, we were probably bringing in, say, 20 new people a day and trying to onboard them. We didn't have an HR system to begin with to deal with COVID. We didn't have training plans, like they're called SOPs, standard operating procedures. We did not have these written down. We didn't have anything like this because it was all in everyone's heads. And we'd probably bring on one person a week max in the past because someone would leave, we'd bring someone else on, and that person could hang out with someone else who really knew the system, and they would have a couple of weeks to really learn how to do it, and they could take their time and ask questions. So when you're bringing in that many people into the business, you need processes like, this is how you make mochi, this is how you make ice cream, and we didn't have that. So then we were writing those in the background as well as disaster.
What a full-on period of time, but you did it, and the business has just gone from strength to strength since. So, huge kudos. And I think it says a lot about your leadership and levels of resilience to come through that sort of time.
I felt physically depleted as a person. I'm not going to lie. Like, honestly, everything that entrepreneurs say, like, oh, take care of yourself, make sure you've got time to exercise, sleep. I did none of that, and I felt pretty broken by the end of that process. But I have taken time to
You've claimed some of that back, I hope. Yeah.
to rest after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. And I think it is an important message that sometimes business does take all, I mean, it is absolutely, we should try and balance things wherever we can. But actually, sometimes when it's your baby and it's everything and it's your whole livelihood, you can't, because your business needs that level of sort of time and attention. And it is hard. And I think this is one of the things we try to reaffirm on this podcast, not to put people off, but just to be realistic that sometimes these are not fun days and they take everything out of you. But I think as you go through those periods, you can handle the next bout of that kind of craziness. You'll have a bit more resilience built up. You'll probably have hopefully more people around you and that's probably a good segue to come on to talk about hiring and also your own leadership style and how that's evolved? Because I guess, in the early days when it's just you and your brother and your family, to a business of over 300, I would imagine your leadership style and learning to delegate and things like that has become really important. So do you mind taking us on a bit of a journey around how your leadership style's evolved, and what maybe for you have been the key kind of catalysts or key decisions or things that have happened that have sort of enabled you to become a better, stronger leader?
I've heard my brother say this in a podcast that we were on together with Piper, and he said that we came from quite a trusting background. And we did. We came from a professional background, both of us. So we understood that when we hired someone, we gave them the trust and the freedom to do their work. And I think that's something that if you start from that base, that's a good place to start from, because if you hire someone and you micromanage them, and I'd seen this in my parents' bakery, I'd also seen it in my accounting firm and all these places, you can see how micromanagement doesn't work. So if you start from that basis anyway, early doors, we always brought someone in and sort of probably gave them too much trust. And then if they proved themselves not that trustworthy, then we'd start pulling the reins in. So that was sort of the basis that both of us had started from. That was a value that we both shared, which is great. It's what my brother and I's leadership style started from. The team that I had to manage to begin with that grew the most was our factory team. And so it was very not low skilled, they were actually very high skilled, but they're ultimately working on a factory floor. I used to be down there with them. We'd roll mochi together. We'd hang out. There'd be a huge amount of camaraderie. If they're packing till 3 a.m., I'm packing till 3 a.m. We did it all together. I never expect anyone to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And that's very much how it started. And then as we grew, I had to not be in the factory so much because I had to start managing things in the office, do more accounts, do more strategic stuff, go to sales meetings with my brother. And so then we brought on, I guess, an executive. The next stage was an executive team. Well, if I wind back a little bit, the first person that I hired in the office was our technical manager. And I think lots of people ask me, how do you know who the first person to hire is? And I have to say, know your strengths and weaknesses. Like, I'm a chartered accountant. I could do the accounts until the cows came home. So that was definitely not going to be my first hire. But I don't have the patience to do factory checks in the morning and go and check like a wooden spoon. Does it have any splinters? Does that mean you've got wood in there? Or even you're not allowed wood in the factory, like take that out. Like all of these rules didn't necessarily interest me, but I knew how important they were. So I wanted to hire a professional to do that. So that was why my first hire was that. And then as more generally, then we hired an executive team. So we then hired a head of sales, head of marketing, head of finance, and a head of operations. And that's when I feel like I really needed to step up my management style and leadership qualities. And that's when I got an executive coach on board. And I remember saying to her, I think I'm redundant. I've made myself redundant. All these people are so smart. They know how to run the business so much better than me. What value do I bring anymore? Obviously, we worked it through. There are lots of things that you need to pull that team together, but that was genuinely my first reaction. And then as the team grew more, I think you just have to learn how you have different personalities and how some ways of reviewing and discussing works for some people and not others. And so I think you've just got to be emotionally intelligent enough to learn how this did work with this person but not. So you're constantly learning, I guess. And it's just been a journey as our business has grown and grown. The caliber of team that we have just continued to grow, and I had to change as well as a leader and learn to let go. And then when we brought on a CEO, the ultimate step back. How do you manage from a board as a board member now at this point when we got private equity investment? Again, that's a very different skill set to being super involved in the business on a day-to-day basis.
For sure, for sure. A couple of things I wanted to pick on there. One is just around hiring. I mean, this is our day job, so I'm particularly interested in it. But your experience when it comes to hiring in general, I'd love to hear your main lessons from that, particularly when it comes to executive hiring. Potentially, I mean, you've hired a CEO, so that I guess is probably the most important hire of all. But what have been your reflections and lessons, particularly that we can pass on to other founders listening to this that might find hiring difficult? Because it is hard to do, and it's something that I think we all can get better at over time, but is so important to a company's success.
I think one of the best pieces of advice I got about hiring was from, again, my Ned, my non-executive director. And he said, pay for the most expensive person you can afford. Because, for example, if you're going to hire someone at 60,000, you might think that's a lot of money, but if they're not quite right and you should be paying 80, then that's 60,000 down the drain because that person is going to fail in that role. So just push it up if you can, another 20,000, and that person at that level will be completely transformational and be at exactly the right level that you need. So go for that pay, for example, but also don't go for 130,000 because that person won't be interested in a business at your size because they will have had so much experience that it's too much sort of sleeve rolly uppy for them. So having his guidance on that was super helpful. And if you don't have a Ned, then hopefully James, they have a great recruitment consultant to help guide, because you would have seen it so many times, right? So I would definitely take the advice of people that have been through it before in terms of finding the right level that you need. And then secondly, I think you've got to go with your gut. You've got to want to have lunch with this person. You've got to share the same values as them. And I think that attitude over skill, because someone could be really good at their job, but you just don't work well together. They don't fit in the team. They don't fit in your culture. And that's just not going to work. So those two things I think are absolutely key.
Great advice. Thank you. And I'm sure our listeners will be so inspired by your story and really want to come work at a company like Little Moons. Now, I know you're not the CEO anymore, but you obviously, it's still your baby and you're still involved. So how would you describe the culture of Little Moons, and what to you makes a candidate typically stick out, just in case anyone wants to send an application through to the website?
It's difficult, like what I want the culture to be and what it actually is working now. I've realized it must feel quite different.
These things evolve.
Yeah, I'm not part of the team anymore. That was something my executive coach said to me, Viv, you've got to realize you're not a member.
That's a hard transition, right? That's probably,
right.
Yeah.
So the culture that we both want was one where people felt respected, people felt cherished, and people felt valued. And ultimately, that's it. So a place where anyone feels that they're welcome, regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, whether they're covered in tattoos or not, like come as you are. I want everyone to feel, just as long as you're here to work hard, that's the sort of place we want. And we all spend so much time at work, and we both have worked in places where we didn't enjoy working, that we made a note of what we didn't like in a business as well as what we really enjoyed. So as long as people feel that they're here and there's high challenge, high support, that they're valued, cherished, and respected, I think that's really ultimately the main values and cultural values I think I would want my business to have.
Yeah, that sounds like exactly the sort of business I'd want to work in, and I think a lot of our candidates as well would chime. And clearly has been incredibly successful. You've grown the team to a super impressive headcount, and it seems like those values and those qualities, you can't do that unless people really resonate with that. So thank you for sharing, Vivien. We're sadly getting towards the end, and before we get onto the wrap up questions, I just wanted to kind of take a step back in general. You know, you've been through this incredible scaling journey. You've built a true family business, a legacy that I'm sure your father would be incredibly proud of. And you've worked with your brother in this. As you are going into the next stage of your career, I guess, what are you most proud of, and what are you most looking forward to now that you are not in the day-to-day of Little Moons?
What I'm most proud of is my team. When I walk into the office and I just see the hum, well, it's quite empty sometimes. But when you go into a full office, when we have a full office day on a Thursday, it just watching how things work. And I remember I used to have to go to the exhibition stands, for example, and like build it up myself. Now I go to exhibition stands and they are so beautifully executed, and I didn't have anything to do with that. So our look and feel, our brand touch points, someone gets it and it's passing down, and the quality of build is right there. To me, that means something is working. Or I went to one of our sales team took me to Iceland, and I just sat there while she presented to our distributor out there. And the way she talked about the brand and her quality of presentation, I just thought, I had nothing to do with this, and it's so brilliant. So these are the moments that I'm most proud of from a business leader. And then I guess from a brand, anyone that's actually heard of Little Moons, I still have a little skip in my heart, because I've spent so many years explaining what a mochi is, soft sweet dough. No one had any idea. I'd stand in endless exhibitions giving people mochi, and they're like, oh, this is weird, don't get it. And you just have to bounce back from that. So now when I hear people say, I love Little Moons, just like when we first met, my family love it, had it last night, it's in my freezer. That's what makes me super happy, like it's all worth it. And the fact that like people are copying us, so people are noticing us, that we're now building a frozen snacking category. So we've got people like Unilever, we've got like snacking magnums. They've obviously seen what we're doing, and it's impacted them. And I've always grown up looking at these huge companies like with the greatest of respects, and so it's kind of nice to know that they've noticed what we're doing.
It's incredible. Yeah, it must be so proud. It's a kind of, yeah, you've created a category, and one that will continue to grow and grow, I'm sure. I mean, it must be lovely to see it from the outside in sometimes and just look with such pride on that. We're sadly at an end. We've got two final wrap-up questions, Vivien. I've absolutely loved this chat, so thank you again. This podcast is 40 Minute Mentor, so I've got to ask you, if you could be mentored by anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I would love to be mentored by Sarah Blakely of Spanx because I love following her Instagram account. She's got such a great energy about her. She clearly loves what she does. How she got the idea and built it up from scratch. I have endless respect for her.
Yeah, that's a great. I think somebody else has called her out. She's incredible. I mean, that would be a dream mentor for the podcast as well. So we'll manifest that she becomes your mentor and comes on the podcast. We'll put that out into the world and see if it happens. And finally, Vivien, what is one final piece of advice? It could be career advice or life advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with today.
I think a little bit how we started off. Like I would 100% encourage you to start your own business. It's our small way of making good in a world full of craziness. It's all under your control. And confidence is the key. We get so many knockbacks. You really have to have that inner confidence. So build it. It's like a muscle, like resilience. It's a muscle that you can build. You're not necessarily born with it, or it might not be strong right now, but you can work on it. And that would be my piece of advice for your entrepreneurial journey and life.
Yeah, very wise words. Thank you for such an inspiring start to the week. I've really loved this chat, and I know our audience will as well. So thank you so much, Vivien, for being a 40-minute mentor. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.